Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are still in music spacing the finale frontier. We are getting close to the end of this series, so if you've made it this far, good on you. This is tricky stuff. We're talking about the spacing width table. If you remember in the previous video, we were talking about these values, and if you haven't watched that, I really recommend you go back and watch that first before you watch this video, because I feel like this might not make any sense if you don't know what's going on here. But as I mentioned in the previous video, with these values set, you are going to get sort of a fixed table of widths for each duration. So with this particular setup, you know, your half notes are going to get a width of 136. Your eighth is going to get a setup of 52. And you can change the reference width and change the reference duration and change the scaling factor. But those values are going to be sort of automatically calculated up and down the durations. There's no way you can kind of individually adjust them using the these values option here. Using the spacing width table, however, we absolutely can, which kind of just is another point of interest in how powerful Finale can be. Is like we can literally set the width of any duration that we want to anything that we want. So that's kind of incredible. This used a default width if duration not in table. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but let's actually open this window. We press the widths button, we get to this duration allotments window. And this is literally where we can set a specific fixed spacing width for any duration that we want. Now the way that this window works is that you have spacing width number 1 here, and then you have your next and previous buttons, and it'll go 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, etc. And each one of it's basically a list. This is sort of an old school way of doing a list in computers. It would be much better if this was a table. You can see like widths on the left, the width number on the left, the duration, and the spacing width itself. You can set. It'd be much easier to do it like that, but this is sort of an old way of doing it that kind of saved some graphical space, I guess. But anyway, this is what we have. So we're navigating through this list, and you can see the durations change. Each item in the list is a different duration, and I'm just going to scroll over until I get to duration 1024. Again, this value is in EDUs, which is a numerical equivalent of an actual duration. If you press the duration itself, you can actually set the duration here, or it will tell you what duration you're looking at. So again, 1024 is a quarter note, and that's selected. If we go back a few here to 512, that's the eighth note, and that's selected. There are values in between, as you can see, too. So 1024, 768, I believe, is the dotted eighth note. Yep, so there you go with the dotted eighth note. And then some of these are actually triplets, and these have their spacing width as well. Now, one thing I want to point out is that the duration of 1024, which is the quarter notes, you'll see that the spacing width is set to 123. When you have these values set, you can see that your reference width is 84. Now, initially, when you open up this duration allotment window, Finale is basically kind of pre-filling this list as if this was the scaling factor of 1.6179. The difference is that the reference width is 123 as opposed to 84. So if you just check spacing width table and don't make any changes, basically you're doing the same thing as changing these values and setting the reference width to 123. Kind of basically. It's slightly different because again, all of the, in this list here, not every single durational value is accounted for. Things like 5 tuplets and septuplets and stuff like that, they're not actually accounted for. They're kind of calculated in a different way. It's so very close, it's hard to really tell the difference anyway. But effectively, it's like changing this to 123. So if we just check that and hit apply and OK, and then respace, you'll see the differences that I kind of outlined in the previous video when you change just the reference width. Kind of a similar thing happens, right? So with just that checked, you're effectively changing the reference width to 123. Now again, with this list, what you can effectively do is set any one of these durations to be anything that you want. So let's just say I'm going to take this 341 duration, which I actually know is an eighth note triplet, right? And currently it's set to have a spacing width of 57. But I'm going to do something crazy here, and I'm going to actually change it to 300, right? Significantly larger. Just this duration. Everything else is going to be exactly the same, right? So what this is going to do, as you can imagine, if I music space now, you're going to see this crazy thing happen in just this measure where I have the eighth note triplet. These eighth note triplets get a lot of space, right? I've just literally defined that one specific duration, 341, to have 300 as opposed to 57, right? And you can go the other way too. So if you want to make this, 12, not 512, but just 12, then all of a sudden your eighth notes are going to be really, really skinny, right? I'm not sure what the exact value of using this tool in this particular way is, but this is just to illustrate that that it can be done like this. You can literally set any duration to any width that you want. Now you can also add and delete durations from this list here, and the way you do it is I'm not going to do it here because it's a little weird, but you just set the duration that you want, type in whatever you want, type in the width, and then press insert, and it will insert a duration with that spacing within it. Or you can just press the delete button, and it will delete the width that's being shown here, in this case number 12. So you can add as many durations as you want, delete them. But again, this list is it's tricky because there's so many durations that you can account for, and Finale in this duration allotment window at the outset, and there are, let's see how many, 23 different items in this list. It's basically only counting the basic durations, quarter note, eighth note, half note, whole note, double whole note, all the way down to 64th note, the dotted versions of those, and some of the triplets, not even all of the triplets. I believe, 30-second triplets through half note triplets. There are some missing triplet values in here. And obviously all of the quintuplets and the septuplets, all of those values are missing as well. Now Finale will still calculate those kind of based on the rhythms that are closest to it, so it's not like it's not going to give values to those durations, but that's what's going on. Now one thing, let's go back to the very beginning of this list, to the spacing width item, spacing width item number 1, and you'll note that there's a duration of 0 here. So Finale is using this very first item in the duration allotments window to be what it's calling the default width, and you're seeing that it's set to 84. Now back in the spacing width table here, you'll note that there's this option here that says use default width if duration not in table. Now normally this should probably be unchecked, but if you want to check this, what you're going to do is that basically any width that doesn't exist in this table, so that includes all of those quintuplets and septuplets and everything, that's going to get this spacing width of 84. Interestingly, I believe this is sort of a bug, but I can't actually change this to anything else. You see I just changed it to 56 and went to next, and then came back to it and it reset it to 84. For some reason, this seems to be stuck at 84. I'm not sure why. I feel like this might be a bug, but this is a bug so deep in the program, I'm not even sure anybody would even care or be curious to fix it. So, but anyway, that's what's going on. With that option checked, any duration that doesn't exist in this allotments table is going to get 84. So let's actually just do something here. Let's go back to those quarter note triplets that I had set, which are eighth note triplets, which are at 341. I had set this to 12, not back to normal. It's 57, right? But let's actually delete this item. So 341 and 57 we're going to delete, and so now there is no 341. So there's no eighth note triplet defined in the duration allotments, but I'm going to use the default width if duration not in table. So now when I reset music spacing, exactly what happens that I thought was going to happen is happening. These eighth note triplets are now getting a duration of 84. That's what's going on. The value of that, probably very slim. I'm just going to undo so that we can get back to a few things here. Make sure that we get our eighth note triplet back. There it is. And let's set that to 57. There we go. So so that's what's going on with this use default width if duration not in table. So this all sort of begs the major question, what in the world is the point of this duration allotments window, and how can I use this to my advantage, if at all? Well, let's say that you're really concerned about your spacing and you kind of want to change it so that your fixed ratio of 1.6179 isn't quite fixed. For example, let's say that you want your larger durations to have a slightly smaller variable, slightly smaller ratio, so that maybe your whole note ratio is like 1.5 something as opposed to 1.6179, and then as the durations got shorter, the ratio actually got a little bit larger. The effect of this would be that the shorter values would get slightly more space relative to the larger values as opposed to this sort of fixed scaling factor of 1.6179. And so I'm putting up onto the screen another table that I've created. In the first row is that table from the last video I showed you, using a fixed ratio, that 1.6179 ratio, all the way across, and you can see that the widths are changing across each duration, right? So you start with 84 at the quarter note. If you go back to the dotted eighth, we got 69, 52, 42, etc. And then going the other way, 111, 136, 180 for the dotted half and all that stuff, right? That's if the ratio stays the same all the way up and down the table. Well, what if I wanted to actually change the ratio going up and going down so that the ratio going down gets a little bit larger and going up it gets a little bit smaller, right? What I've done here is I've sort of created this situation where the ratio is being changed by 5% in each direction for every note that it doubles or halves, right? So the ratio for the quarter note and the dotted quarter note and the half note is still 1.6179, but the next ratio at the whole note is 1.5409, which is 5% less than the 1.6179 ratio. Going the other way, the 16th note ratio is 1.6989, which is 5% higher than the 1.6179, and then the 32nd note is 5% higher, and the 64th note is 5% higher than that, right? So the actual ratio itself is changing. And believe me, I went through a lot of complicated math to come up with these figures that you see in the bottom row there, showing the EVPU values for each of those durations based on that variable ratio going up and down the table. It gets super complicated, but it's totally possible to do in this duration allotments window. Now I could go through here. Let me just set up a couple here just so you can see this. So if we set up our 1024, I'm going to set this up to, let's go back to 84 here. And then I'm actually going to delete a few here. So this, we don't need the 1365. The 1536 we're going to set up from the table as 111. The 2048 we're going to set up as 136. The next one, 37.2. Now, instead of the 180 from the 1.6179 ratio, we're going to change this so that it's 175. So it's a little bit less than the fixed ratio version of it, right? And I'm going to go up and down. I'm going to do this all the way up and down this table and set this up, but I've already done this, so you don't have to sit and watch me do this. I'm going to go over to this other file where I have this set up in my duration allotments, and you can see that my 1024 is 84, and if I go backwards, we're going to get the values that you see in that table all the way down to the 64th duration and all the way up to the double whole note duration. There it is. All right, so this is a custom duration allotment table that I created based on a variable ratio plus or minus 5% for the ratio itself, starting with the golden ratio at 1.6179, right? So I've got this all set up, and when I press the music spacing, it's already been done, but you can, well, actually, if I do it like this, let's change it to these values. That'll give you the fixed variable ratio. You can see what it looks like. And if we go back and set it to my spacing width table, my custom built spacing width table, and music space again, you'll see what happens is that the whole notes got just a little bit less space. The 16th notes here got just a little bit more space. It's barely noticeable. I'll undo so you can see how that works, and then I will redo so you see it. So that is the normal fixed ratio, and that is the custom built ratio. You're just giving a little bit more space to your shorter values just to make it a little bit more readable perhaps. So again, that's just sort of creating a custom built table based on a variable ratio between durations. Yeah, really complicated stuff. Again, it took me I feel like it took me a year to figure this out. Well, not a year, but yeah, it's kind of crazy. So anyway, so that is basically how the spacing with table and the duration allotments window works. You can really go to town and really customize your own type of spacing here. Now, in the next video is going to be the last video of this series. I'm going to talk about some spacing with libraries that actually come with Finale, and you can actually create your own library. So if I wanted to, I could create my own custom library based on this duration allotment. Some of those custom libraries that come with Finale do actually make use of this spacing with table and this duration allotments list here in different ways. So I'm going to show you how to save your own library, how to load libraries and all that stuff, and kind of show you a little bit about what those different spacing with duration allotment libraries lists do. So some really interesting stuff coming up in the next video. There's not a ton to it, but I think it's worth checking out. All right, so if you followed me this far, congratulations. This is really complicated stuff. It's been really enlightening for me. I may have mentioned at one point that music spacing has been something that is a piece of Finale that I myself haven't completely understood all that well for a very long time. But just in the process of preparing these videos for you guys, I learned an immense amount of things about what's possible with music spacing in Finale. And frankly, there is quite a lot that's possible. So I'm glad that I went through the process, and I'm glad that you have stuck with me to learn all this stuff as well. So hopefully everything I've said makes sense. Hopefully it's somewhat useful to a degree. And yeah, so there you go. So yeah, one more video to talk about the spacing libraries, and then we'll be good to go. Once again, thanks a lot for watching. My name is Jason Lafredo. As always, please don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you soon on the next video.